Great. Thank you so much, everyone, and happy Earth Month. I want to welcome you to our Lunch and Learn today about what happened in Chicago's Department of Environment. I'm John Walling, the Executive Director of the Illinois Environmental Council, but today's presentation is completely in the hands of our amazing City Programs Director, Iyana Simba. Iyana leads our city program in terms of strategy, advocacy, policy, etc., and oversees all of our issue areas that have to do with city work. So she spent quite a bit of time on thinking about this issue and working with the city and city decision makers, and is really excited about this campaign and how it will play out over the next year and beyond. So I just want to introduce Iyana Simba to get started with the presentation today, and happy Earth Day almost to everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Jen, for the very generous introduction. Again, my name is Iyana Simba, and I am IEC City Programs Director. And today we're going to be talking about what happened to the Chicago Department of Environment. What is the state of things in Chicago right now? How do we get a new department? What does that look like? And then we'll have a little bit Q&A portion at the end of it. So moving on to the next slide. Just a little bit of background about IEC. So we are a coalition organization that has been around since 1975. And our main focus has been advocacy, education, and movement building. We represent over 100 different environmental organizations and 500 individuals throughout the state. And our overall goal is to protect Illinois' environment. So that includes the people, natural resources that we depend on, plants, animals, all of that. A little bit more about what we actually do. Again, for that advocacy piece, that includes influencing decision makers, sometimes through direct lobbying. Sorry, it's on the next slide. But sometimes that includes direct lobbying. But in other cases, sometimes it's just doing general education. So we'll do like some really fun tours or just making sure that elected officials are aware of the environmental issues here in Illinois. We also coordinate our affiliate and member organizations. So basically just making sure that we're utilizing our resources in the most equitable, efficient, and useful manner. And then also mobilizing supporters. So folks like you all that are joined today that may not be an official IEC member, making sure that you feel empowered to be an environmental champion and be able to talk to your elected official. So moving on from that to get into the meat of everything. Really quick background on the Department of Environment. So in 1992, that's when the Department of Environment was established under Mayor Richard M. Daley. That is the son of Jay Daley, the famous one who ran for was mayor for 20 plus years. But he kind of was a little bit of a green crusader. And so, part of his initiatives was like Millennium Park, but he did establish the Department of Environment. So between 1992, 2011, things are going great. Department is expanding. And then in 2011 is when we hit a little bit of a budget crunch. So funding from the ComEd settlement, which funded a lot of the department, as well as grant funding, begins to dwindle. And then we're also still in the midst of the recession during this point. And so under the Reimagined administration, the Department of Environment is dismantled. Fast forwarding then to 2012, officially in January, that's when the department is dismantled. And of about 70 positions, 50 remain and are spread across different city departments and the Office of Sustainability, where they remain today. So going forward then to 2019, Lori Lightfoot, our current mayor, she runs on a platform that includes a promise to reestablish the Department of Environment. Now, moving on to, and I also want to mention too, during that time that IEC, as well as some of our affiliate members, were part of the mayoral transition team. We also published our mayoral report that same year, and that included several things and actions that the mayor could take, including reinstating the Department of Environment. So jumping back into 2019 and really until now, upon entering office, Mayor Lightfoot walked back her promise a little bit, and she does hire Angela Tovar as the permanent Chief Sustainability Officer, and then also begins to hire out some staff to build out that Office of Sustainability that really drives the city's climate agenda. Then in 2021, we see that the fiscal year 2022 budget includes nearly $200 million in climate infrastructure. This is huge. This is historic. This is the most influx of money for environmental issues that Chicago had ever seen. And really a lot of it came from federal dollars and was tied to Chicago's overall recovery plan. Then in 2022, where we're at now, it has been 10 years since we've had the Department of Environment, but we also have a lot of cool initiatives that are happening. We have the Climate Action Plan that's being revamped. We have the We Will Planning Initiative. We have the city revisiting its building standards. We have the Food Equity Council. So we have a lot of good things that are also happening. And then just for a little bit of context, February 2023 is when there's the Chicago aldermanic and mayoral elections. This is why we're kind of bringing up this idea about the Department of Environment, because whether the mayor leaves office or whether she takes on a second term, this is why we're kind of aiming for this time now so that she can make good on her campaign promise. Moving on to the next slide. So beyond policy and politics, things have changed since 2011. Chicago is experiencing increased impacts of climate change. We have storms, we have more frequent and intense storms that lead to flooding, which really means that people's basements end up being backed up. But we also have critical infrastructure like the DeSable Lakeshore Drive that ends up being cut off. We also have, for folks who may not be familiar, when the sewage system is overwhelmed during really heavy rainstorms, all of that runoff that you see coming from the street, everything from your bathroom ends up going into this central system. And when it's overwhelmed, it ends up being pushed out into the Chicago River, harming the overall, not only the water quality of the Chicago River, but the entire Chicago water system. Also in 2020, that was the year that Chicago experienced its wettest spring on record. That's the same year that Lake Michigan reached record levels and permanently swallowed up beaches and damaged homes along the north and south shoreline. And then we have at the other extreme, right? We have longer, hotter heat waves. And I really want to emphasize here that heat waves, it doesn't just mean, oh, fun of the sun, beach day, or stay inside and turn on the AC. There are people who are at serious risk by heat waves, specifically people with disabilities, the elderly, and the houseless. They are at a serious risk when temperatures rise. And also, 4 of Chicago's top 10 hottest summers have all taken place in the last decade. With summer of 2020, the same year that we had our wettest spring on record, the summer of 2020 is also the hottest on record. And then finally, with environmental rollbacks, right? We can't ignore what happened underneath the Trump administration. And we do know that what happens at the federal level does impact what happens at the state and local level, and generally just the public's attitude toward environment and climate change. Moving on to the next slide. I also want to highlight that these climate impacts do not fall equitably across the city. Due to a history of redlining and current zoning laws, Black and brown and low-income communities continue to bear the brunt of climate impacts, as well as decades long of disinvestment. And so these communities are not only facing climate change broadly, but they're facing issues that are closer to home that amplify its impacts. So with a lot of EJ environmental justice communities, there's poor air quality because they serve as dumping grounds for industry. So that means that a lot of people, they also have higher rates of asthma and other respiratory issues. And these are exacerbated when we have heat waves that induce smog and overall worsen air quality. I don't know if some folks have like weather apps. Sometimes they'll tell you like, oh, especially if it's like a warm day, not even necessarily a heat wave, just a warm day, it'll say, hey, the air quality is not that great, you need to stay inside. We're going to see more of that, and we're going to see EJ communities being disproportionately impacted by that. And then many neighborhoods, especially on the south and west sides, lack trees, which makes them especially vulnerable to heat waves and urban heat island effects. When you're not able to have a place in the shade to cool off, or when you have the sun directly hitting your home, driving up your energy costs. And then also a lot of communities, especially low income, especially Black and brown and low income communities have poor and aging water infrastructure, which makes them vulnerable to flooding. And also means that not only on the ward level, but at the individual level, folks might also lack capacity for flood mitigation. So what do you actually do when there is a flood and your basement is backing up because of the poor infrastructure? What are the tools that people are provided? A lot of that is lacking in these same communities. So moving on to why do we need a Department of Environment? I kind of mentioned obviously some of the things before, the issues that Chicago is experiencing, but I wanted to highlight a few things. We know that environmental enforcement and inspections are down since the dismantlement of the Department of Environment. This is as staff members have fallen, and as there's, the Department of Public Health, the Department of Planning and Development, Department of Streets and Sanitation, just for example. All these different departments have varying levels of cross communication, but they're all handling these environmental enforcement and inspection. And we've seen the severe consequences that happen when we have decentralized enforcement. I have down there in the picture, that is the botched Hillco implosion, which was a city approved implosion that spewed toxic dust into Little Village. This is an environmental justice community that has high rates of asthma and other respiratory issues. And this implosion spewed toxic dust into the area at the height of the pandemic in May of 2020. And then also not having a Department of Environment complicates the planning and zoning process. So this means that residents or community organizations now have to spend more time and resources first identifying what departments they need to interact with, and then still having to sustain the interaction with all these different departments. In short, that really makes it harder for communities to mobilize against existing or incoming polluting projects. And it makes it a lot easier for developers to stay or to try to bring in polluting projects. So having a central department could provide a much more equitable process for people to engage, can bring a little bit more of a level playing field for community partners and developers. People would have the same amount of information and access as maybe we had a Department of Environment. I also think too, just even on the individual level, there are different departments that receive environmental complaints that internally they may lack the capacity to actually address. They may not even really do or be able to address something that someone has an issue with on an individual level. So I think having a central department not only is about this larger zoning and planning issue, but just individually having a little bit more agency and knowing who to talk to when you see smog or you see something in your community that bothers you. And also I think in turn that makes it a little bit easier for departments where they're freed up a little bit more to focus on their intended mission. And then finally, as we see increased attention to climate change at the federal level, having a Department of Environment puts Chicago in a lot better of a position to implement those dollars as quickly as possible. And then moving on, kind of in the same thread about a department, but we need a reimagined Department of Environment. We do not need a copy and paste. We do not need the department that we had in 2011. We do not need that same department for 2012. The climate, the political, the financial realities of then are not the same as now. And we need a department that addresses environmental racism and follows the leadership of EJ communities, including community-driven decision-making. I'll say, the original department provided a lot of expertise, was an incubator for innovative programs and projects, some of which still remain today, but it did not address environmental justice and equity. It just didn't. And we also need a department that is going to be permanent. We need one that's going to be able to withstand the changes in administration. We need one that's also going to, we need one that's going to be permanent and can withstand the changes. And we need one that reflects the political and financial reality. Standing up a 70+ position department right now is very much not feasible. So we need to have a clear vision of what exactly do we need a department to address. We need one that facilitates collaboration and communication among agencies, especially to carry out these bold climate initiatives. We need one that engages the public and builds trust. And we need one that addresses inequities and environmental racism. Continuing on, how do we go about getting a Department of Environment? Again, kind of how I mentioned on the last slide, is we need a clear vision of the department that we want. How do we want the department to function? What roles are essential? What are the responsibilities? What does the governance structure look like? Who has the power to make environmental policy decisions here in Chicago? We need to have a clear vision for that to make a strong ask. We also need to build out political will. We have a mayor that does have a passion for environmental issues, but we also have several different amazing environmental champions among Chicago's alders. But we also have a lot of alders who are either apathetic to environmental issues or who are downright just pro-business. So in order to build a sustainable, permanent Department of Environment, that means that we need the political support regardless of who is mayor. And that also includes building support within the departments as well. And then finally, funding. We need money. Just as the fiscal year 2022 budget, so the last budget played a critical role in infusing nearly $200 million in climate spending. The fiscal year 2023 budget, so the one that's coming up this fall, is going to be critical in making sure that we can reinstate the Department of Environment. I also mentioned too that this budget is the final budget of Mayor Lightfoot's term. So this is a critical moment where we need to hone in why we need money for the Department of Environment. So what can you do? IEC, we're going to be doing a lot. We're going to be doing a lot of obviously education and mobilizing, talking to alders, talking to departments, talking to the mayor's office. But there's also things that you can do on your end. So one, contacting your alder to raise support for reinstating the Department of Environment, sharing what your vision is for the Department of Environment on social media. We have our Bring DOE Back hashtag. You can get creative with it if you want, but try to use that hashtag. But even just simply sharing and tweeting at your lawmaker, this is what a Department of Environment means to me, is super important. And then also following IEC on our social media, subscribing to our emails and newsletters. I promise we won't bombard you. It's always including important information. And then finally, for folks who are official IEC members, we will be having some conversations more about what does a new Department of Environment look like? What are we really asking for? And how do we have one that goes beyond what we had in 2011? So with that, before we hop into the Q&A portion, I just want to say thank you for supporting IEC, whether you are a member or you're just showing up today. This is how we build power for people in the environment, through having conversations like this beyond just the Department of Environment, just being able to, build the power for people in the environment. So we'll jump into the Q&A section. That is my email if you have any additional questions that maybe you don't feel comfortable putting here in the chat, or you'd like to talk to offline and we don't have time to get to. But with that, I will open it up to Q&A. I just clicked back over and I'm like, I see the chat is filled with a lot of questions. I will just start.
Do you want me to ask you them, Iyana?
Yeah, that'd be helpful. Yeah, thanks.
Cool. Okay, so there's a couple of questions about the checkout bag tax. And it's just discussing the checkout bag tax as a funding source. And in particular, the last 5 years, it's been in effect. It's been a continuous $6 to $7 million revenue stream for the city in the Department of Finance, and it doesn't go to environmental issues. But also it's, I think, a funding source that, unless, it's a type of funding that unless we raise it, we would like it to become smaller. Do you want to talk about the bag tax as a potential funding source?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a good funding source. I think it won't solve everything as far as standing up a full department. I think there's definitely going to be pushback because it was originally intended, right, for environmental issues, but now it's kind of went to the city's general budget. So I do anticipate there will be pushback from the city on it, but I do think it is a viable source. Can't be the only one, but I do think it is a good source of funding.
So another question, how would the department need to be created to be permanent? And what would make it immune from transitions from administration to administration?
So I think the question was is how to make the Department of Environment immune to changes in transitions. I think the funding. I think honestly, I really think that's what's going to be the biggest part, is the funding, because I talked to several people who used to work in the Department of Environment, and really that's what led to the demise. I think there's of course work to be done to build out the political support for it, but in reality, it's the funding. That's the main thing that's going to make it stay or go. And so I think identifying a permanent funding structure is going to be most critical in order to have a department that withstands changes in administration.
Great. And then I think with respect to recycling compliance, I think there's a question here about moving the recycling compliance and policy over to a Department of Environment and then collecting all fines given to violators as part of this funding. Is that something you see as possible?
Sorry, Jen, you broke up a second there, but I'm thinking I'm reading Catherine's question right here. Related to recycling compliance about being collect. Okay. Yeah, Catherine, I mean, I agree. I think, the Department of Streets and Sanitation in the city broadly, like, has not done a great job at recycling. And so I think having a central person in the department that can kind of do the cross communication between Department of Streets and Sanitation and other relevant actors would be a lot better than what the city is doing right now. So I think we're in agreement here. And as far as collecting the fines to go to part of their funding, I think it could be possible. Again, it might be a pushback of where does that money go now versus what's going to allow it to go from wherever it's going now, and then making a case for it to now go to the Department of Environment. I think it's more of a question of what. I think it's a little bit more of like a political question. What would be the pushback to that? So that's my thoughts. I hope I answered that.
Yeah, so I'm actually gonna chime in. So I agree. Like, I don't technically have confirmation that it goes directly to DSS, but my assumption is that it goes to DSS because they're the ones who are supposed to be enforcing it right now. My thought is that they're barely enforcing it and they are in no way resourced well enough to handle it. There is no one that is currently dedicated to just recycling inspections or enforcement. And of the points within the ordinance that are supposed to be checked, there may be checking one of like 6, and it's really, really bad. So my thought is that if like we could move that whole task and have a fleet of people who are better trained, who are equipped to address all the points within that ordinance, there would be a lot more, there would be work there, and then there would be a lot more fines there because there would actually be thorough inspections happening, and that could be a good funding source for that department. That's my thought, and I sort of was wondering if, like, that's why I asked about the org chart, if that was covered by the Department of Environment in the past, and if so, like, how many people did it have, or did they have covering that? Because I think that could be a really core part of how to fund it, since there are so many violators in the city right now.
Yeah, so as far as the original org chart, I'm happy to send that over to you because I have it somewhere in my emails. And then I also have the ordinance that followed the disbandment of the department, where it shows where all the things, including recycling, went to. So I'm happy to follow up and share that with you.
That would be great. Thanks so much.
No problem.
Great. And I see a question about whether IEC is endorsing a mayor candidate. Do you want to take that, and I can add if you want?
In the past, maybe I'm wrong.
I didn't hear you at the beginning. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say IEC, we do not have a formal candidate endorsement process. In the past, we have supported some of our affiliate partners like Sierra Club, who do have an endorsement process, but IEC ourselves, we do not come out and say like IEC endorses X candidate.
Did put in our city scorecard, and I'm not sure whether we're releasing one this year or we'll do one next year. It depends on the number of votes. But IEC doesn't have a related PAC that can endorse candidates at this time. Okay, so there is let me go. My Alderwoman's office said that their office introduced an ordinance to City Council calling for the cost to establish the Department of Environment last year. What's the next step? What is the barrier to entry for reestablishing the department?
Yeah, so I think you're referring to Alderwoman Haddon, who introduced that order. There was like a follow-up meeting, and IEC was also part of that with the mayor's office. From my most recent understanding, in the fall, they were looking for, there was supposed to be funding for a study of that in the budget, and that funding has not been approved. So really the barrier is just the funding. It hasn't been approved in the budget. It was supposed to be included, but it wasn't. So now they're looking to maybe do like an RFP to get someone to look into that, but there isn't funding for it. That's the barrier. And I think further to answer your part of your kind of your second question is, I think that's something that I wouldn't call it an excuse, but I think it's a way for, as far as barrier to reestablishing the department, is to say it's too expensive. We know it's too expensive, but we don't have a study, the funding for the study to say how much it would cost. And I think even to the degree if we do have the study, of course the response is going to be, this is really expensive. And that's the whole reason why I was emphasizing in the presentation of having a clear vision of what are the bare essentials that we would need for a department, because I think the city's ultimately going to go default back to that 70+ position department. And that's not exactly what we even need and what we realistically can achieve. So I think the biggest barrier is just the funding.
Great. And that is another question Claudia asked, is funding the only barrier, or is it a severe lack of political will?
I think it's mostly funding, and I think the political will perspective is the political will to push for funding for it. Because where we're at, we have all this COVID money, we have federal money that's going to be running out soon. And from what I've just heard from this conversation with alders is that no one's necessarily like, oh, we don't want to do the Department of Environment. Everyone, for the people I've talked to, have been really supportive of it. But as far as pushing alders, specifically in this budget, to get them to fight for money for the department is what is, like, I think from the political will perspective, that is somewhat of a barrier.
Does anyone talk about how if Chicago had a department, the city would be better positioned to get access to federal money?
I don't know. I mean, I haven't really heard or read anything about exactly how it would help, but I can only imagine having a department would help a lot. You know, maybe I'll give an example of, like, for example, the city's current lead service line replacement program, which is, you know, has federal funding, but like, to me, in my mind, I would think having a department to assist the Department of Water Management to seek more federal funding or to take whatever federal funding is coming in, I think that would just be a lot more efficient. So that's just an example that I can give. I haven't heard anybody specifically write out how it could help, but I think having a department that could basically act as kind of like a mediator or facilitator between the federal government and the departments, I think would definitely help. Compared to now where it's left to the mayor's office and then the department heads, I think there needs to be an additional person in the middle
there. Does the IEC have any idea of a preliminary count of the number of alders that are already on board for the DOE and would look forward to working with us?
Well, I'll say we have about, I would say about roughly 15 aldermen that we consider environmental champions who we pretty much expect would 100% be on board. I think we have about another 10 or so that need a little bit of convincing, that may be a little bit more of apathetic or unaware of environmental issues. But I think if we push for it, we could definitely get them to be a yes. And I honestly think there's a small handful of alders that would truly just be like, we do not want a Department of Environment. And again, I think with those, it would just be that hurdle of showing how we could actually fund this. So I'd say, to answer your question, about 15 or so alders that we could probably count on to support the reinstatement of the Department of Environment.
I mean, do you want to talk too? I know we were on the mayoral transition committee, but about the mayor's commitment to a Department of Environment during her campaign?
Oh, Jen, you were breaking up a little bit there.
I don't know what that's about. Do you want to talk a little about the mayor's commitment to a Department of Environment during her campaign?
Yeah, so during her 2019 campaign, I mean, she literally made a promise of reinstating the Department of Environment. Now, once she got in office, again, kind of walked back that promise and, you know, made we don't have enough funding for it. So let's start up this office, or let's build out this Office of Sustainability. And originally had, I forget Elise, and I'm forgetting her last name, but she was like the intermediate chief sustainability officer. And then she yeah, I definitely would say she made the campaign promise. We had the conversation as far as being part of the transition team, reiterating the need for Department of Environment. But upon entering office, she essentially walked that promise back.
Okay, so there are a few items in here about we're getting a lot of interesting feedback in the chat. I'm just going back to Amy talking about in the old Department of Environment days under the second Mayor Daley, there was promotion of economic values and benefits of environmental investment, including green roofs, solar, geothermal, and natural plantings. So just putting that in there. And also, yeah, let's maybe that as I know it's more of a comment, but maybe that is more of a question.
Yeah, no, I think whatever a new Department of Environment looks like, I think that is an element that should be included, especially when we're talking about not only just beyond recycling, but when we're looking to things like a circular economy, right? How do we make the argument for why that's important? What are the benefits to businesses? I certainly agree that that type of an element coming from the original department should be included in the new one.
Great. Do you want to talk about the status of the lead pipe replacement?
Yeah, so currently the Department of Water Management is the one overseeing the city's 2 lead service line replacement programs. One is part of their equity program that'll replace about between 600 to 1,000 over the next year or two. And then the other one replaces, I think, about roughly 100, and that's the homeowner initiated program that is meant for people who are willing to actually pay for the replacement in full. The current numbers that I've heard, at least at the end of March, I think the city has replaced 38 lead pipes so far. Part of the reason why they gave it being a little bit behind is because they had to send out an RFP, and then they just now are getting contractors on board. Prior to that, they were just using people in-house. So that's what's happening with the programs. They're still current, they're still happening, but they are funded through HUD. There was about $15 million for it, and the city's still actively seeking more funding because Chicago has 390,000 lead pipes, and $15 million is just a drop in the bucket. So that's what's happening with the current lead pipe replacement program.
Great. And we're seeing a lot about just an org chart and the different responsibilities of the Department of Environment. I know IEC members have met just about some of those discussions. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so in 2019, we kind of had some questions like that. Like, we started a preliminary org chart about what the new department could look like. But as I mentioned in the presentation, IEC with our members, we are going to have some envisioning conversations where we can present to the city, like, this is a department that we want to see, so that the rebuttal isn't, oh, well, this is what it used to look like. We definitely want to put together some type of a proposal to give to the city, as well as departments.
Sarah asked, how can the department be created to include a mandate for other departments to not just ignore environment once there is DOE? So required cooperation.
I think it gets to that question of the governance structure, right? Like, who is going to actually have the power to make the decision? Is it going to be the chief sustainability officer? And what amount of power do they have? If it's ultimately always up to the mayor, then that's going to change how things are mandated. But I think with the new department, we would want to see where whoever that person is, if it's the sustainability officer or commissioner, whoever, we would want to make sure that they have actual power to mandate stuff, and that now it's not just simply, overseeing initiatives, but actually has decision-making power. If that makes sense. I mean, that's kind of my answer. I don't have like a solid answer, but yeah.
Great. I'm not seeing more questions. If people want to put any more in, or Iyana, you want to add any comments?
Yeah, I mean, and as we wait for some other potential questions, I just want to reemphasize, with this department, hearing from some folks that, is just like, you know, we've done this fight before. We've done this fight. This fight has been going on for several years. And I think this time is different, not only because of the political timing, but I think it's different because we actually have the numbers and the power, and we have the support. We need to do a little bit of convincing, but I think we really can get funding for a Department of Environment, and one that actually truly carries out the missions that our environmental advocates care about, not just something that's underneath one person or one mayor that wants to see it carried out in a specific way, but a department that actually represents what environmental advocates want. Oh, Debbie, I can name 5. I don't know if I can do 15, but definitely Alder Maria Haddon has been a huge supporter. She's the one that introduced that order for the city to look into the cost of reestablishing the department. Alder Matt Martin has been a huge environmental champion. Oh, thanks, Catherine. Alder Jeanette Taylor has been a huge supporter. Alder LaSpada. Let me try to get you that last 5th one. See, now I'm like, a lot of the folks in the Progressive Caucus have been very supportive. Alder Ticho Lopez has been another person that's been very vocal about the need for a Department of Environment. So 5 out of 15, 1 out of 3. I hope that helps. I hope that helps, Debbie. I can send you a list of the full 15, but those are the ones that are coming from.
Iyana, I think you're glitching out. Or your audio, sorry.
Yeah, your audio is a little glitchy. While you fix that, I'm just gonna put a link in the chat to, just speaking of Alderwoman Haddon and Alderman Vasquez, we're doing Earth Day Zoom with them and Congresswoman Chakowski on Friday at 1 p.m. that we definitely encourage folks to come to, whether you're in the district or not, but just want to show a lot of support to those folks. Yeah. And then, yes, definitely. And I definitely would encourage folks, you know, as we're doing this, again, this is Jen. I guess I will go on video for a little bit while Iyana's figuring out the audio, but definitely encourage folks to get involved with IEC. We do have a City of Chicago group, and you know, we have member affiliates that are organizations. There are dues, but we can waive them for groups that are really volunteer based. So get in touch, because we'd love to be doing a lot of this organizing, including the targets. So right now, our groups are based on involving other organizations. So if you're involved in a group, that is a way to get involved. Otherwise, just contact Iyana. We'll figure out ways to get people involved. I know we want to do some more listening sessions, both with the public and with our member affiliates. We tend to represent environmental groups and organizations throughout the city, and that's a way to plug into IEC. Iyana's.
I think I'm good now.
You're good now, so great. Go ahead.
I don't like to use my AirPods. I don't know where I glitched out at, but kind of building on what Jen was saying. Yeah, we're definitely planning some public listening sessions, and then for our folks internally, talking about a new Department of Environment, revisiting some conversations that we actually already had in 2019. But those are some of the things that could definitely help. You see my email if you want to send me stuff about what you think as far as the Department of Environment. Been very vocal folks here in the chat, but if you have more thoughts, feel free to reach out to me. And then of course, filling out our action alert. I think somebody put it in there. Yeah. If you want to fill out the action alert that lets you tweet at your elected official, that's a way to really help right now. And then I think as we get closer to budget season, we're going to need a lot more support in conversation about this to really push for funding. So
Right.
Those are ways to support. I also would say too, for organizations, if maybe you're not able to join the listening sessions or conversations, but you just want me to just join one of your organization's meetings to talk about the Department of Environment campaign, I'm also happy to do that as well. Okay, I think I answered all the questions.
No, I think that's great. Do you just want to close us out?
Yeah, thanks again, everybody, for joining us today. Yes, happy Earth Week, happy Earth Day. We have our town hall later this week. The youth climate strike is also this Friday, and it's going to be in person. So, and everyone for joining us. Okay. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. Feel free to reach out to me, and thanks for your continued support.